Hi, everybody. I'm joined by Bill Ladd, the CEO of Duckett Ladd, and a CPA firm in America who advise dentists. You might have seen our first video we did together, which was really popular and got loads of really good feedback. So me and Bill thought we'd do another one, basically. So Bill, lovely to see you again.
And it's great to be here again. I'm looking forward to this part.
Fantastic. So what we were doing, or what the way we thought we'd approach it, is we were looking at the different areas of the business of dentistry through the abstraction model. So last video we were talking about the fee generation section, so how dentistry works, what associates get paid, that type of thing. And today we're going to look further out in the abstraction and talk about operations and kind of just compare notes on how they possibly work differently across the pond. To start with this, Bill, I thought I'd kind of share something, an insight that Ross got a few years ago, and it's always quite interesting to us, that the cost to open a surgery in the UK is remarkably consistent. So you could have a practice in Glasgow and a practice in Cornwall, and the cost for them to open that surgery all in is about £650.
Okay.
So we're like, well, that's kind of unusual. There are some differences if you're in Harley Street in central London and stuff like that. But saying
Sure.
to deliver private dentistry, the costs are basically the same across the country. So what I feel like that says is there's very little innovation in the operations of how a dental practice is run. We work hard with people to actually kind of think about it and think about how they're kind of making their model more profitable, so they can either pass those savings on to the customer or retain more profits. But it hasn't quite happened yet, and I think that's definitely due to the fact that it hasn't fully needed to happen yet because it was an inherently well-paid business. So what's it like over there with you? Do you find the operations are pretty rock solid already, or is it still an area to grow into?
I think with almost any business, including our business, your business probably, operations are always a work in progress, or they should be.
Mhm.
Most people have no idea how to run a business, much less set up processes and procedures. And to be honest, when you look at all the heavy lifting you have to do as a business owner, Dan, that's probably the least enjoyable thing, especially for people like you and I.
Yeah.
We like to think of the big ideas, but when it comes to the implementation and the execution, um, a lot of people just aren't wired for follow through on
Mhm.
that. So I think we tend to find that very few of our dentists are just inherently gifted at building out systems and processes that are going to make them money. And so we always think that's an opportunity for some coaching, or for the opportunity to find somebody in your business who can do that. It's funny. I call it being a builder.
Mhm.
And in our partnership, you've met my partner, Jared, and I'm just very fortunate because he is very good at building stuff. If something's broken, he's able to step back and find a way to fix it, put a process in place, and then find a manager who can just make sure the process goes. And so we call that almost, make it up, make it real, make it recur. Those are kind of the steps. And I think operations tend to be on the make it real and make it recur. And we see a lot of issues with our clients, and things that they could work on to make that better for sure.
Mhm. So would you work with Jared on the make it up phase, then he figures out how to do it, and then it's easier to resource to get someone to run the process ongoing?
Yeah, typically a visionary mindset is the one that has ideas, and honestly, a lot of them are probably garbage.
Hmm.
And so just real quick, this is what happens a lot of times, and I think it could have happened here if I didn't have Jared, is someone who is a little bit more of a visionary but not good on follow through. They do come up with ideas of what needs to happen, but they don't have a clear and concise path on how to get there. So they just start cobbling stuff together.
Hmm.
And you start putting little processes in place here or there, and all of a sudden you have a tendency to create major complication on something that could be very simple.
Hmm.
And so we see this in dental practices all the time. They just cobbled together a financial reporting model that's just so convoluted,
Yeah.
you can't make heads or tails of it, so it's meaningless and nobody looks at it. Um, So it's at that point that you just almost have to take a step back and kind of zoom out, see where we're at, and then zoom in and hopefully have somebody who can take that. Sometimes you have to burn the whole house down, just to be honest, Dan, and start all over. And we find, and I found here that once we've done that, then it changes everything because your employees are in a structure that makes sense, that works for them from efficiency standpoint, and the ability to produce and make money comes along with it. And it's no different in dental practices. We see the same thing in those as well.
Yeah, it's definitely our experience because I sometimes get given reports from practices and it's almost like my brain shuts down and I actually can't understand them because I don't know what it's telling me.
Right.
And you'd think, okay, so what's the perfect reporting? And we try and work with clients to get there. So we do have a recommended format for reporting, but it also has to work within that organization, we find. So there's a framework on like the principles you've got to follow.
Mhm.
We think it's really important that you have clear definitions because I'm sure you've been in hundreds of meetings where people are saying, is this a lead, an inquiry, a book? And it's just painful to go through.
Sure.
So we want precise definitions and a framework to work with. But every practice that reports well, they kind of bring in bespoke elements as well because
Mhm.
they've got why they're doing it. Do you find that this is driven by the principal or you're having to recruit an outsider to come in and make this change?
I would say with most people in the United States, it's it starts with the principal realizing they don't know what they don't know. And sometimes there's a level of pride or maybe lack of consideration where they don't ever find that. And they just keep doing what they're doing. It's like we've always talked, Dan, here in the US and the UK, you can make money in dentistry in spite of yourself. With a
Mhm,
bad operation, you can still eke out a living, do okay.
mhm,
Um, and some people are perfectly fine with that.
mhm.
Those aren't really the kind of clients we work with or the kind of clients you work with. So I think last time you even made a comment to the effect of you probably have a biased view or something because the clients we
Definitely.
see tend to look for coaching and look for opportunities to get in the rooms where they can be exposed to people who help them
Mhm.
with these kind of questions. And so we tend to find that the ones we work with are open to that. We kind of look at the financial almost as shining the light on something that's broken. And then when it's an operational issue,
Mhm.
that's when there needs to be a connection made to try to find somebody who can fix it. So probably the vast majority don't really concern themselves too much with this, but the ones we work with do, and they do better because of it.
Yeah, I think I often say when I'm walking through the abstraction model that most dental practices will be fee generation and like a layer of administration to
Right.
allow the fee generation to happen. And when we're talking about operations, it's kind of well, it becomes more abstract because what you're trying to do is get data, make changes to change future outcomes. But there's
Yeah,
obviously opportunities there, but there's risks that come along with it as well because you're going to get some stuff wrong. And then it
sure.
requires a certain personality type to go, that didn't work, which means you've got to be kind of humble as well to know that you're going to get things wrong. Often there's a role in the UK that it kind of delineates between administration and operations, and it's the difference between a practice manager would be the administer, and the business manager. It's a bit of a cringy term, but like is the entrepreneur. Because
Mhm.
often what we've found is a principal dentist might be just really busy doing dentistry, and often they do have every intention of they might read the books we send them and stuff like that, but actually the make it work and make it happen consistently takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time and energy.
Yeah.
So we kind of created this new role called business manager, to kind of service that function. Does that exist in and it doesn't always work, I probably should say. It's probably, yeah, it's hard. There's some excellent business managers I've worked with, but it often a business manager will end up being a practice manager, even though you've recruited at a different price point and job spec, but they'll end up just doing administration.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
We, a lot of it kind of depends on the nature of the practice. Let's say a typical one doctor practice that right now is doing decently. What they tend to have is over here, it'd be more of what they call an office manager. And that office manager is one that wears probably the most hats of anybody in the practice. I mean, they're doing a little bit of everything. Now, where that can be unhealthy is when we see the practitioner hire an office manager and then abdicate every responsibility to them so they don't have to deal with it.
Yes.
And that's something we see a lot. And if you have a great office manager, fantastic. That works really well. If you have someone who really doesn't have the skill set of building and is a good communicator and can pull the team together, then you're going to run into the same issues as if you try to build them out yourself. I mean, the system's going to get clogged. People are going to be frustrated. Revenue is not going to come in like it should, and or turnover, and you're going to be frustrated as an owner. So we do tend to have that position. I will say having a great one makes all the difference in the world, but most people don't. I mean, most people have someone who is doing their best, but maybe not really what that doctor needs. So when you kind of move up the chain and then say, well, what about bigger group practices or DSOs, over here, the corporate type owned, they tend to look at it very differently, Dan, and you know this. I mean, they tend to look at the business of dentistry like a business. And they say, listen, as we grow, our corporate infrastructure has to grow. And we're not going to look at this like a single doctor would look at it. We're going to look at this like we are on a path from, 5 to 7 to 10 to 15 to 20 million, whatever the case may be. We need to put infrastructure in place so that we treat this like a corporation. And so you start seeing a C-suite developed. And when you have a C-suite, really the key role in there is the COO, the chief operating officer, right? So that's where we tend to see a major emphasis put when they start growing and taking it to scale. They realize what got them here won't get them to the next level. So they start putting more operational type people in place, true operational people. And that's where you tend to see companies are able to kind of set themselves up to scale. So it's kind of like a graduating from where an office manager was able to do all these functions to the point where now you actually have to have someone in there who can take the operation side and run with it. And we're seeing there's some, it's like anything, there's good ones there and there's ones that really need help as well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because there's no one like career path that we found finds a good business manager. Like they can come from really, really diverse backgrounds. Because I think if they come from the corporate world, I don't know, I'm biased because I'm a small business guy and that's what I like. But they're kind of not that it's box ticking, but it's like making sure that you're being seen to do your job. Whereas if someone's been involved in small business, there is that kind of more bootlegging entrepreneurial thing,
Sure.
which I think is really, really important in a good manager, that you kind of you're not looking for permission, or you kind of just go out there and figure it out and get it
Right.
running. And I was thinking when you were talking, because you could probably deploy Jared into any business and he'd sort it out if he
100%.
have the time to do it.
Yep.
How does he work with people most of the time? Because it's interesting, isn't it? So in our job, or in my consulting job, um, I can get to what I believe the issues to be or the truth to be pretty quickly, and that mixture of experience, personality type, all of these different things. So I can get the insights quickly. I can often tell you what to do with them, but I can't tell you how to deliver it. So
Right.
that's where consultancy stops, and it's not for everyone, because it doesn't inherently solve any of your problems. It creates the conditions for them to be solved, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah.
But equally, if I had more time, I don't know if I'd get. I think it would be diminishing returns. So even if I was in a dental practice multiple days a week, I wouldn't be able to fix it in the same way that Jared could. So what does he do to help his client base? How does it work, I suppose?
So when I think of Jared as an operating guru, the most important client he works on right now is our firm. And so we make sure that plenty of his time is carved out to just work on this. When it comes to how he operates with clients, I wouldn't say that he's as much as a operational consultant, as at that level he functions more as a financial consultant. So let me back up real quick and kind of just a real quick framework of how we view business. And this is certainly kind of tied in with the traction model, and you're aware of it. But when you think through the core functions of a business, we see three basically. We see sales and marketing, we see operations, and we see finance. Sales and marketing is bringing patients or customers in the door. Operations is taking care of them, and finances is collecting and reporting how you did. When you think through that practice that you were talking about, that maybe has that business manager / office manager, they probably are wearing the lead hat in all three of those roles for the most part. They're kind of running with the sales and marketing, trying to do whatever they can do to try to drive new patients. They're dealing with staff, they're setting up processes, things like that, probably primarily related to insurance or for you guys, the healthcare system collections. And then on finance, they're probably taking care of the books and records. So, when it comes to how we function when we deal with our clients, we do tend to say we're going to be sliding into that finance role. And our job is not necessarily to help you fix your operational problems, because there's people out there who are much better at that than us. They actually come from the dental space. Operations in the dental space consulting, they're out there, and there's some really good ones. So our job is to say, well, what are we seeing in the numbers that tells us that something's broken operationally? And one thing I was going to kind of share at some point today is that you tend to see that in what we would call revenue cycle management. I don't know if that's how you guys view it over in the UK or not, but we tend to see metrics and numbers will start to show us a picture where revenue or turnover, whatever you want to call it, is broken. And that's where we tend to say, let's throw brakes on everything else and let's fix that problem first. Because if you're not collecting every dollar you're earning, or pound you're earning, that's a problem, right? So that's how we would tend to function, or Jared would tend to function more, is shining a light on what's broken. Now, just as a real quick adjunct to that, I do agree that as consultants, and consultants have kind of a reputation of being, hey, I'll tell you what's wrong, but then I'll collect your check and never see you again. That I think that model has to change. And so what we try to do is have a consistent relationship with our clients that we do that work, where we're meeting on a regular basis and building systems of accountability, so that if something needs to be fixed, it's assigned to a person. There's a direct reporting of, is this getting done or not? And I think that's how you can tend to make sure that projects are moving along and being taken care of.
Yeah, because our role is meant to be completely non-exec, but it definitely turns into a more executive thing. So it's like the one-off analysis that we do, called the diagnostic process, which does exactly that. It kind of uncovers. Ross does a whole load of analysis on the financial model. Luke does it on the marketing system, competitive set. And I actually come to the meeting cold without seeing it, so we don't get entrenched in our opinions. And then we go through it, and then we can provide recommendations. Sometimes if there's a specific project, we say we should work together on an ongoing basis. And it's definitely there where there's a funny thing that is like, you can sometimes see really, really clearly what needs to happen, but you're trying to put the structure in place so the client can see it no longer in theory. They can often understand it when you're discussing it, but see it in their day-to-day practice, not their dental practice, but actually what they're doing. And it's almost, I've seen it so many times, I know it's true. I don't know if I can get there quick enough, but it's that breakthrough moment where they start moving differently in the business and seeing the information differently. So I often feel our job is to get them to the point where it clicks, and that's the consultant's job. But I don't know if I told someone that that's what I'm going to do, they'd be interested in it, because I can. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
It does. And what's funny is that most of the time they probably know it too. They just haven't come to the point where they are comfortable with the fact of the work it's going to take to fix it.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to know something's broken, and it's another thing to say, I'm going to do whatever it takes to fix it. So let me kind of give you a real quick example. Over here, as practices are growing, and I told you they kind of start moving from more of a sole proprietor mindset to a corporate type mindset. There's this bell curve of services that I think they need as far as what we do. And when you're first starting out, that what you need from an accountant is very small. As you're really trying to grow your business and get it to an optimized single practice, there's some consultancy and things that we can do there to really help that.
Hmm.
But as you're really wanting to go, primarily based upon getting more locations, which creates more stress and more headache, what you need from the finance portion of the business model increases. And so we developed a relationship where we are serving as a fractional CFO for people, and that's probably the highest value we can give a client. Is we're going to sit in the finance seat as the head of that in a fractional capacity, save you some money there, but at the same time, we're going to put a lot of foundational stuff in place, because the aim has to be, if you have scale goals, we need to be charting a path to get you where you have a full-time CFO, full-time COO, chief marketing officer, so on and so forth. So as we're kind of progressing up there, what we're seeing is that we come into these relationships, and to your point, it doesn't take long to look at some metrics and say, okay, this is broken. A good example, we're working with a group who we just absolutely love. And you can look and you could see their collection percentages are low. Their cash flow is an issue. And so when we were talking to them, one of the first things they said is that, yeah, we're going to put a focus, we've been wanting to put a focus on revenue cycle management. And it's been a to-do for a couple of years, maybe, or a couple of years. Well, when we come here and shine a light on that, I think if a good consultant is willing to get themselves fired, you say whatever you need to say, which is, we got to fix this, because I think it's a moral outrage if you're not collecting the money you earn. I mean, that's just how I look at it. It's silly, right?
Yep.
I mean, you and I don't look at it that way.
Yeah.
It's not right. And accountants tend to do that too. They tend to discount themselves. But when you're not collecting what you've earned, then that's the number one thing you should focus on. I think we talked about last time that more, turnover, more collections leads to better ratios and more profit. And so, we were able to say, okay, right now we have a growing operation. The operations guy is a little bit overwhelmed. Well, who out there can help us? And that's where we're going through a process now of evaluating a consultant who can come in and say, hey, yes, it's going to cost money. It's going to be a project, but we're going to put it on somebody who's really good at that. And he's going to give us a proposal. And then as finance guys, we're going to look and say, how do we pay for it? How do we fit this into the budgets that we're building out and creating? So that's kind of how we tend to see, is that, and operationally, we are a perfect adjunct that could come in and say, hey, let's help figure out if something's broken, try to quantify what the effect of fixing it is, figure out what the cost is, and let's figure out how to pay for it. And so that's how we tend to try to work, in conjunction with an operating system of a bigger practice.
Yeah, definitely. We try and have better answers as well than just that. That's the issue. So like we know a load of different sales trainers, front of house trainers, and stuff like that. But it's the kind of spark of ignition in the practice that I feel that's the bit we're trying to help them with, of just changing how the whole thing operates, and it is really difficult to do. When you're doing the fractional CFO role, is your objective to kind of get it up and running and then recruit them and step away, or is it a longer term view you're taking on it?
It depends on what the client's goals are. Is one of our CFOs we're working with right now, it's a closely held family legacy type practice, and they really don't have immediate plans to try and capitalize or have a capitalization event, recapitalization event. So they're more than happy to optimize their practice, and they want financial transparency. And what they really want is somebody to help them make good financial decisions. And so that's a relationship that we see probably being a little bit longer term. Then we have others that really are trying to go from, say right now they're 12 million, but they want to go to 20 or 25. Well, realistically, what they'll need from a CFO is going to phase us out sooner rather than later. So we can either say we're not going to take those clients on because they're not a long-term fit, or we can say, listen, we can still add a lot of value and help chart a path to get you to that roadmap. And then on the tail end, there's still potential, the opportunity to do some help on the tax side and maybe even some high level advisory. So we see it both ways. I mean, I think it really just depends on what the clients are trying to accomplish, to what makes sense for, what role and for how long, from a fractional CFO.
Yeah, we had a similar project where we kind of took on the role for a kind of mid-level group for 2 years, knowing that we would be exited. Like it was just a kind of, we were trying to recruit someone because we knew it kind of didn't make sense for us to be offering that service, because a bit like Jared, I kind of want our guys working on our business. So if they
Sure.
almost got a full-time job working somewhere else, it basically doesn't work out so good for us. So that was a good experience where we learned a lot, but it's not something we do much of, I guess. So speaking about leaving money on the table, so yeah, I believe it's a moral outrage not to get paid appropriately in a timely fashion. I think it's a moral outrage to pay too much tax, but there's a slightly more difficult moral outrage because it's harder to quantify, which is how leads are managed as they come into the practice. So one of the biggest things, this again, in dentistry, this didn't used to be a massive issue because the demand was there. There wasn't great competition, so you could just put volume of inquiries into a practice. They could more or less kind of do whatever with them, and it would end up in profitable revenue at the end. Whereas now, I'm working on a big project with the marketing agency at the moment to figure out how we become a better teaching company, because we can't just deliver leads anymore. There's a greater requirement on us, even if they're not getting consultancy, to give what the gold standard of communication protocol is, and just more support to basically tell you how to manage leads, because I see it as one of the biggest gaps in UK dentistry, mainly because I've seen it done well, I suppose. It's like if you genuinely have gold standard communication, which is a lead comes into the practice, you call it immediately, you WhatsApp it, and you email, and you kind of repeat that for a few days. The amount of revenue you'll get from that is astronomically higher than if you do what most will do, which is reply to an email in a few hours with an email, or they probably don't call, and not even don't know what it's like for you guys, but I never used WhatsApp with a client until lockdowns, and then WhatsApp is like just what we use now for everything. So it's definitely seemed that way in dentistry. There was a practice that got onto it really early and got massive. It worked really well for them, but now I'm kind of saying it has to be in there. So when you're in the CFO role, are you looking at that as well? So you're spending 10 grand a month on marketing. It looks like you're getting 200 leads in, but actually the revenue generated from that's quite low. What's going on? Are you looking at that stuff as well?
Yeah, I think that's the beautiful thing about what we do is you can build out a metric or a tracking device for pretty much any function within a practice.
Yeah.
And so, from a high level 10,000 foot view, we are going to look obviously at new patients. We're going to look at net new patients. In the US, it's important to track what attrition is falling out the bottom as you bring on new patients. We tend to see what's really interesting is that a lot of times the focus is so much on new patients, which it should be. New patients bring good opportunities to produce, but you also want to kind of keep that solid base that keeps coming back and referring more people. So a lot of times we'll see that new patient numbers may be good, but you're losing just as many, if not more, after 18 months of no appointments. So there's opportunities to try to reappoint and kind of get people back on the schedule there. But we look at those. I mean, we even go as far as looking at online reputation. What are they seeing? We try to, in our conversations, see what kind of presence they have online. Is it engaging? Are they standing out just a little bit? I think we talked about this last time too, is in dentistry, you don't have to do much to stand out from your competitors, just like accounting. And so are they doing those kind of things? And so then you kind of look and say, well, what are we doing? And this is harder to measure, but it's a question is what is that patient experience? Like you said, from the minute that they are interested in you all the way through to when they decide to set appointment to when they show up and to how they're serviced. So it's that flow of a patient through the practice and its sales cycle into its op cycle, into its finance cycle. That's super important. Is it something that's going to create a raving fan who's going to go out and tell every person they know? If
Mhm.
not, that's that gold standard it should be. And the sales is the very first component of that, in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think as a CFO, or even just as a practice owner, you should be tracking some of the metrics they're telling you. Is your sales and marketing activities working?
Mhm.
And then kind of factor in how much you're paying for it. And you can start to quantify pretty quickly. Are you getting a good return for what you're paying for marketing? If you're paying for marketing at all. And the ones that don't
Yeah,
tend to not have the kind of patient flow we're talking about.
yeah, it's really difficult because there's also like a mindset thing when approaching it as well, that I definitely, a practice has to want marketing to work, and I feel that marketing is sometimes seen as, well, I think historically it was seen as a phone bill, just something you had to pay and
Yeah.
whatever. That's what we should
Yeah.
spend 5% on marketing. That's what we do. Whereas now I think it is seen as a cost because it is expensive and it's economically tougher times. So I can see, I can't prove it, but you can kind of see practices that interact with it with a kind of, they're looking for the person who's not actually in the market for dentistry. They're calling up about, hires or something like that. And they're looking for that to evidence that the leads aren't good, rather than going, but we got another 50 leads where they were good. Let's feed back to the agency and get more of them. So it's across, I work with loads of clients that don't use Hive's agency as well. So I see it across all the practices. So do you ever get that into it? Like what's your mindset when looking at these leads? Are you looking at it positively? You kind of need to want it to work. That's the thing. But yeah, do you get
It,
involved that far?
that's one thing that I really like about your practice, that we don't have a marketing subsidiary, or we don't have I mean, we have relationships with marketers, but we don't necessarily have any kind of ownership or have one under our banner. But what I've kind of noticed is that the really good ones don't just look and say, we're just going to have a shotgun approach to marketing. We're going to have a strategy. When you kind of look at your abstraction strategies, the next,
Hmm.
box up. And I think that's kind of how marketing needs to look at it. It needs to be a coordinated strategy. And so when we're having our conversations with our clients, when we ask them, what we're spending, say 3% of turnover collections on marketing, what are we getting? What are we doing? That equates to X amount. Do we feel like we're seeing the new patient numbers we see? Do we feel like they have a strategy in place that is going to get not just a lot of them, but get the right kind, to your point? Those are the kind of conversations that do tend to come up. I don't know that we can have as much insight as you guys can, just because you have a more, bigger expertise. This would be kind of like where we would find an operational coach. I mean, we would say, let's get you with a great marketing company that we know knows the space and that we've seen have good results. It's more of a referral relationship typically with us once we kind of shine a light and see something's off on that side.
Yeah, I think it's a funny thing because it's my experience. I think at core I'm kind of a salesperson, so I always view the world in kind of what more could I do or what more could I have done to get that over the line, and that's how I see client management. That's how I see
Sure.
management. All of these different things. So I kind of definitely hone in on it. But I remember when I first started working, it was actually part of a previous organisation, but started working with Ross. Our sales process was literally, if you could get an accountant to speak to someone, then you might be able to chase them to send a quote afterwards, but they would
Yeah.
never chase any further than that. I was
Yeah.
saying, honestly, if we just do a better job, we'll get more new clients. And it's now got to a point where um, it's super. So our average sign up used to take 6 to 12 months because
Yeah.
accountancy is not the most exciting service in the world.
Yeah.
But now it's I think 50% sign on the day, because we've got software in place, and most sign within the week. And then actually what's been really interesting, before anyone's actually had any service, the onboarding process it's as slick as we're always trying to, like operations, we're always trying to improve it, but it's really slick. So it asks people to refer if they've got any mates they'd like to refer at the end, and people will, because they've felt because we've got our sales process and onboarding.
Yeah.
It's not never perfect, but it's definitely different to what you'd experience somewhere else. It's letting people know they're in the right place. It's kind of the equivalent of turning up to a restaurant and just being given a glass of champagne straight away. You go, wow, okay, didn't
Great
expect that.
experience.
That's amazing. I'm definitely going to tell everyone about
Right.
it.
Right.
And you haven't even tried the food, but you've kind of you've stacked the deck in your favor to have a happy client at the end of it. So yeah, I feel I need to up my game to do a better job at helping dentists work on this area, because it's a bit fragmented. So I might say if it's the associates, then maybe go and speak to this sales trainer. And like there's really good sales trainers in the UK, quite a few of them. They'll be really good for your associates. Really good front of house sales trainers as well. But there's something missing that I think I could help with, but I don't know what it is. So that's a big project for next year for me to.
Well, what you've talked about though, Dan, is the client experience.
Mhm.
You almost kind of, I look at sales or operations and really maintaining or getting and maintaining revenue pretty simply. And I say there's finding them, there's getting them to sign up,
Mhm.
converting, and then there's fulfillment and retention. I mean, it's really pretty simple. And so what you're talking about there is that experience from the moment that they find you online or they hear about you. I mean, they're always going to kind of vet a dentist out. And so when you think through what we're talking about there, you at your firm have created a world-class experience. And we try to do that here as well. Do dentists do that? Some of them do, and they tend to have really good new patient numbers, and they tend to have a lot of friends and family,
Mhm.
right? Um, that's what a focus should be on that, and trying to again step out or stick out just a little bit. And in the marketplace, a dentist and a marketplace accountant just stick out a mile. So to me, I think that's a huge value add is getting them to understand that you know the moment that they hit your radar, they should have a world-class experience. And if they don't, then you should strive every day to make it so that it is a better experience, because that's what leads to telling everyone, the raving fans that Seth Godin talks about.
Yeah, yeah, and I genuinely believe everyone actually is a customer service expert. Like I feel like if they just flipped it around and saw themselves in it, we can all go into a restaurant and appraise it. A few years ago we kind of did a group exercise at Hive that everyone, as one of their Christmas presents that they were buying, they had to do a mystery shop, and we'd all share our experiences at the kind of Christmas party. This is the type of
Yeah.
wild fun we have down in Cornwall. But it was really illuminating, because everyone knew exactly how to appraise it. I didn't give any instructions. We all knew what we were looking for. So I feel if I can just get people to see that dentists, and there are people doing it really well as well, but like if you looked at your dental practice that way, it'd be transformational for the business. I think that's the big gap that's missing. So what's happened in the UK in terms of search volumes for dentistry, they're more or less the same as they were. It's harder to convert patients. So there's practical reasons that actually people are getting declined finance applications and
Yeah.
things like that. But frankly, everyone is just thinking that extra second or third time about any significant expenditure at the moment, because it is uncertain times. So I think the practices that kind of get obsessed with this customer service stuff are the
Yeah.
ones that are just going to reap the rewards, because because a lot of people won't, basically.
Well, let me ask you a question, Dan, specific to the UK. Sales process aside, when you look at true production and ops, what do you tend to find are the biggest breakdowns? Where are people struggling the most from an operational perspective? Are you able to put a finger on that?
I'd put a big category of lead management and tracking.
Okay.
That's consistently an issue to work on. And the other bit, So this is we touched upon this last time, but because associate dentists get paid so much, so let's say the average is 45%, the incentive often isn't there for them to drive their performance harder. So they might just do a day of checkups, which will actually lose your business money if they're
Yeah.
not doing dentistry
Yeah.
and prescribing dentistry. So this is definitely one of our gaps in knowledge, which I don't think we'll ever solve. But it's like, we know because we've got lots of clients that like there is dentistry to be done on patients. But I spoke to someone the other day who said, "Yep, there's 100 patients we've had, not one of them needed any dentistry." And I speak with my clients and say, "That's impossible, right?" And they're
Yeah.
like, "Yeah,
Right.
that's impossible." So I don't know how to deal with that because I don't know about dentistry. So that's where I think a principal has to spend their time and relay their expertise and say, hang on, you didn't actually scan them, so how do you know
Right.
what's in there? Because it's got to be the same in the States that people who say they love their dentist, they say, oh, they never do anything to me, they say I've got perfect teeth, and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you go to any other dentist that's kind of worth their salt and they're going to find a ton of stuff to do in there. It's just the nature of how plans used to work and the NHS works, that people often just don't treat things in the same way. So that's consistent. Didn't used to be as big of an issue because we used to kind of say, can we find an implantologist? Can we find an orthodontist? Let's get you loads of high value treatments. And that worked. Whereas now there's definitely, it's significantly more important not to go as fast as the slowest man. So to make
Yeah.
your slowest man profitable. So when we'd analyze even decent practices, there's usually one or two loss-making associates in there. And it's not, we don't say get rid of them or anything like that. We say, right, that's their natural way of being because they're still getting paid 500 quid a day. So
Yeah.
to them, they're really good, like what you can't blame them. So your job is to take them to their breakthrough moment. But yeah, it's the bit where it's a barrier is kind of like philosophy of dentistry, like what
Sure.
you
It
treat,
makes
what
sense.
not. Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that. I just rely on my clients.
We see that a lot over here. I think some of it is just the nature of most dentists. It's they're not, I hate to say this, but they're not as confident in presenting big treatment plans, probably because they don't want to hear no.
Mhm.
And I think the good ones realize, listen, this is somebody's health. This is something that, every tooth that stays in your head, I've heard, is worth more than a diamond, right? I mean, it's something that is a lifelong tool that you need, and most people are not happy with it or have issues. And so, you have to look at it and say, our job is to help people. And if you look at it that way, we tend to find that they're willing to say, yes, I'm going to put forth a treatment plan. It may seem overwhelming, but at the end of the day, it is a purchase that you have the full authority to say yes or no to, or maybe to a component of it. But if I don't ever put it out there, then your close ratio on those is zero, right? I mean, you're not going to get any production off of what needs to be done. And some other dentist, if they leave, will say, my goodness, this person needs this, 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 and this. So a lot of it, I think, comes down to the nature of the dentist, just like you said. And some of that can be improved through coaching. Some of it just needs to come through expertise and reps and getting more comfortable diagnosing and presenting the cases at that point.
Yeah, I think it's almost acknowledging that it's a thing. It's like you've got your dental skill, you've now got this whole other capability that you've got to develop through time. And it won't surprise you to know that accountants can be the same as well. So
100%
you
agree.
can,
Yeah.
and also doing stuff for clients and not telling them, so not capturing the value,
Right.
and because you're awkward to charge them. Whereas if you're delivering that exceptional customer service, clients kind of want to get the best solutions, is what
Yeah.
we've found anyway. So there's definitely that in dentistry, that people just make assumptions that, oh, no, they won't want that treatment for whatever reason it might be, but it's probably because you're kind of scared of getting a no.
So help me understand the UK, the NHS, because it's roughly a government equivalent of insurance over here to some extent, right? Is that
Yeah,
fair?
I know very little about how the insurance system works over there, but I'm guessing it's similar. So
Okay.
you get paid for a unit of dentistry, a UDA, and that that varies quite a lot what your UDA rate would be.
Yeah.
So it could be, I think, can be as low as £20, and some people, I think I heard one that was £50. So, and you then have however many thousand UDAs that you've got to complete every year, and you just get paid for the value of that amount every month. And if you don't hit your UDA target, they will claw some back at the end of the year.
Okay.
Um,
So really is it more of a you're being paid prospectively as opposed
yes,
to
yeah, yeah, yeah.
retroactive? So that's a huge deal. That's a big difference between the US and the UK. So just to give you a little background for your listeners to know, in the US, the insurance system, it's more of a you perform the work and then,
Mhm.
like hold out your hand and say more, please. You
Yes,
send in your claim
yeah.
and, again, this is probably one of the biggest operational deficiencies we see is that process should turn over fairly quickly. You guys are lucky if you get that stuff almost like a prepayment or however you mentioned that. Over here, it's you have to do the work, submit proper paperwork, they have to approve it and send you a check. And you can see that that's going to have a long tail effect as far as payment for your services. Um, and then it's compounded when you have someone who's not very good at that process or there's no proper process in place. And
Mhm.
so all of a sudden you send in a claim and the insurance says, well, you didn't do this quite right. And you send back, well, no, I did. Here's this. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And so what you see is people's accounts receivable balloons up and you start seeing over 90 becoming ridiculous. It's all insurance based. And it's just the processes are broken. So, when I think through ops, that's usually the main thing over here is that revenue cycle management is just there's just something wrong there and it's
Yeah, well,
something, it takes
that's,
time but it can be fixed.
I mean, that's why NHS practices historically had such huge values, because in theory, it's guaranteed income. They kind of, it's easy to forget the fact that you have to service it. So you historically you could pay an associate £10 a UDA. So that may end up being more like they're on a 30% deal. So suddenly the economics stack up,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's better. But this has all changed now. So it's more expensive to get nurses, more expensive for
yeah,
associates and stuff like that. So now it is kind of guaranteed to a degree revenue, but it probably isn't profitable. But it's like it's almost like a drug. You can't give it up because you're so used to getting
yeah,
30 grand in your bank account on this date every month. What could we do? So we sometimes say, um, almost treat it like a kind of interest-free loan. So if you're using it to build other businesses, knowing we're going to have to pay it back at the end of the year in the clawback, but if you've kind of diversified your business by that point, then it's okay. But loads and loads of people are converting at the moment in the UK, so it was very rare pre-lockdown, but now it's kind of you kind of almost have to do it unless you've got some like there are notable exceptions. So there are really good operators in the NHS who've been in it for years,
yeah,
got their associates squeezed down on really tight deals, might have their wages incredibly low proportionately, so it still works. If I was in their shoes, I'd be looking to exit now and capture the value, because I don't know where wages top out. Minimum wage has just gone up again in the UK, and the banding for who gets it has gone down, which is pretty tough, to be honest, because it means younger people, where you kind of you're a non-productive worker, to be perfectly honest. You have to
sure.
learn your trade, but if you have to now be paid 25 grand to be a trainee, that's mega.
Squeezes the margins
Yeah,
even tighter.
it does, yeah, and it just makes it more difficult to operate. But all it means is just less opportunities for people to get into different work, because you kind of, if you're paying more, any I wrote an article about 5 years ago that was like, you can and should pay your nurses more, but you have to ask for more as
Yeah,
well,
that's fair.
because
Yeah,
the relationship, it is kind of, it's hopefully going to rebalance in time, but it used to be completely, nurses would leave to get 20p an hour more up the road. So there's
yep,
no like, it used to be staggering to me, because it's like they can't have any job satisfaction if they're going to leave for a few £100 extra a year. Like that's not good. So why don't you take a preemptive thing to pay them more, but say we're going to need you to operate this
yep.
way, or whatever it might be. and then hopefully they'll enjoy their job more because they have more meaning in it, and they've got more cash, and
Yeah.
you'll get a better commercial outcome. So yeah, wages have shot up, um, but yeah, it does seem to be settling down now. But yeah,
So when you look at in the UK, what's happening is people are moving away from the NHS and becoming more of fee for service type, doing fee for service type work, or how's that work?
so most of our clients are kind of in private dentistry. So yeah, fee per item
Yeah,
is how most get paid, and there's
yeah,
also dental plans,
yeah,
which is essentially direct debits. That's what it
yeah.
is. So you pay for one checkup and two hygiene a year, and you spread
Yep.
those payments
I had those too.
over the year. So what you'd do if you had an NHS practice now, you'd go and speak to one of the plan providers, have a chat with them, and they'd kind of forecast what they think would convert. So I've got a pretty good relationship with Patient Plan Direct, and they were explaining to me you kind of only want 40% of the NHS list to convert, so you've got capacity to actually deliver the dentistry above and beyond.
Yeah,
So I mean, nothing's risk free, but it like the UK market is aware. There used to be. I had a client who had a local politician like camp outside his practice when he left the NHS and stuff like that for PR and things. Uh, Now people, I think, we're just so used to things not working for the from the past few years. They're like, yeah, okay, I just got to pay for dentistry now.
yeah. I mean, when people leave the network, we call it out of network with the insurance, and there's some big players over here, Delta and a few others. I mean, it gets nasty, and Delta, is a big corporation that is used to that money, so they'll send out nasty letters to their patients, and really, what patients don't realize is in a lot of ways, insurance is kind of like a coupon over here. It's just a reduction in the price of services, and so you know, if people truly understood the cost of doing business for dentistry versus the reimbursement rates over here, which have maintained consistency for since the 90s, pretty much, that it just doesn't make financial sense. So we have seen a flight to people leaving their networks and going more what we call fee for service. Um, it is interesting as the economy has kind of tweaked a little bit. Some people are getting anxious about that, and trying to decide whether they migrate back in some capacity to take on a few insurances just to kind of have more patient flow. But, I guess what I would say is as your folks are entering into that non-NHS provider status, then that's where revenue cycle management becomes huge. And what are we doing to collect that money? Are we collecting bigger cases up front? How does that work so that we're not having cash flow issues? It feels like under NHS, you have some certainty on cash flow. This is something that the revenue cycle, turnover cycle, whatever you want to call it, it's just going to become that much more important for them to be able to understand how the money's going to flow into the business when it doesn't come with that check on a set date every month.
Yeah, it's definitely an area that we definitely do look at, and it's well, I remember Ross telling me a story about an accountancy firm that like had hundreds of thousands of pounds outstanding to be billed.
Yeah.
So it's kind of mad. Dental practices in the UK aren't that terrible at it, but there's no like market standard that they're working to, and sometimes it makes it difficult from a reporting point of view as well if there's not kind of a consistent methodology of collecting payment. But yeah, it's definitely a big area that we're really keen on. We're very open about it. We think no cash should be left on the table because
Absolutely.
actually, if you leave cash on the table, ultimately someone has to pay, and it'll be a team member, patient, something like that. In stuff that you can't do by being a solid commercial business, basically.
And the easiest way to look at it is that owners tend to be the plug. So who ends up paying for improper process procedures and poor operations? It tends to be the owner. It comes out of their pocket typically.
Yeah, well, I'll say one more thing, but I'm conscious that I'm taking a lot of your time,
You're
Bill.
great.
But it it's funny. It's funny to me how it's really difficult to get your head around business. So if you had a 10 grand marketing, no, let's call it 20 grand marketing cost a year going out of the business, and you couldn't like say what that's doing for you, it's very easy to cut it.
Right.
But when you're looking at a team of people, there's like there are unproductive people in any team, and your job is to is to do everything you can to manage them. But people don't view that cost in the same way. So if there was a 20 grand person not contributing to the team and actually being difficult and possibly toxic in the team, then there are issues there. So I don't know. I think because we're humans, our relationships with money is just not very good, basically. Yeah, because we used to say with business managers, it might cost you £50,000 to recruit them, but it won't because there's probation. So you'll only want to keep them if they're delivering 50 grand of value. Again, it's easy to say that with big salaries, but yeah, we see cost control. It's just not very good, basically. It's like,
well, I think it circles back on the conversation about human nature for most people is to not really necessarily want to hear no as far as like treatment plans and putting forth, trying to sell dental services, but it also works when it means having tough conversations. I mean, you've probably heard the saying, something to the tune of, your success will be directly proportionate to the number of uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have. And a lot of people don't. They won't have those tough conversations. We talked about last time on every P&L, the team cost is the highest as a percentage and dollar wise cost of a business. And you have to look at each person and say, are they optimized and are they functioning to the tune that we need them to? And if they're not, then they either need to be coached and got up to speed, or they need to, be moved out. And it's hard to say that, but it really is that simple.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Usually you conclude that you're not doing a great job as a leader. That's
100%.
that's
That's the last abstract, right? Abstraction and
yeah,
abstraction models, leadership,
yeah,
100%.
absolutely. Well, awesome to catch up, Bill.
You got it. Appreciate it, Dan. Take care, buddy.